So I completely destroyed my marriage and my life because I couldn't keep it in my pants. I'm talking about a 15-year marriage down the drain, kids who won't speak to me, and losing pretty much everything I cared about. The whole thing started so innocently too, just some harmless flirting at the gym. But one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was having a full-blown affair. My wife Sarah found out through text messages, then a restaurant receipt, and finally a photo that basically ended everything. She filed for divorce, took the house, and now I'm sitting in a studio apartment wondering how I became such a piece of garbage. The affair partner bounced the second things got messy, so I lost everything for absolutely nothing. So I'm Mark, 42, marketing manager. I work at this mid-sized tech company downtown, been there about 8 years now. Pretty standard corporate job, decent pay, good benefits. I thought I had everything figured out, you know? Nice house in the suburbs, 2 kids, wife Sarah who worked part-time as a nurse. We'd been married 15 years at that point. Looking back, I guess things had gotten a bit routine between Sarah and me. We were both busy with work and the kids' schedules. Soccer practice, piano lessons, all that suburban parent stuff. We barely had time for each other anymore. Not that this excuses what I did, but I'm trying to give you the full picture here. I was going to the gym pretty regularly, trying to stay in shape as I hit my 40s. There was this coffee shop next door where I'd sometimes grab a protein shake after workouts. That's where I met Jessica. She was probably mid-30s, worked in real estate, always there around the same time I was. We started with just casual small talk about the weather or whatever. At first it was completely innocent. Just friendly conversation while we waited for our drinks. She was easy to talk to, laughed at my jokes, seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I told myself it was just being neighborly or whatever. But honestly, it felt good to have someone pay attention to me like that. Sarah and I barely talked about anything besides logistics anymore. Who's picking up Emma from practice? What's for dinner? Did you pay the electric bill? You know how it gets. So anyway, this particular evening, I was at the gym later than usual. Had some project deadline at work that kept me there until almost 7, so I didn't get to the gym until around 8. The place was pretty empty by then, just a few regulars doing their thing. I was on the treadmill when Jessica walked in. She waved and headed over to the elliptical machines near me. We made eye contact a few times during our workouts, shared some smiles. Nothing too crazy, but I definitely felt something there that I probably shouldn't have. After we both finished up, we ended up walking to the coffee shop together. She was wearing these tight yoga pants and a tank top that showed off her figure. I tried not to stare, but honestly, it was hard not to notice. Sarah had gained some weight after the kids and rarely dressed up anymore, so I guess I was starving for that kind of attention. We ordered our usual drinks and found a table in the corner. The conversation flowed really easily. She asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested when I told her about this big campaign I was working on. She told me about some houses she was showing, made it sound way more exciting than it probably was. Then she started asking more personal questions. Was I married? How long? Did I have kids? I answered honestly, but found myself downplaying how happy I was at home. I told her things had been stressful lately, that Sarah and I were like ships passing in the night, which wasn't entirely untrue, but I was definitely painting it darker than it really was. She leaned forward when I was talking, maintained eye contact in this intense way. She touched my arm when she laughed at something I said. Little things like that, but they felt huge to me. I was getting this rush I hadn't felt in years. We talked for probably an hour. The coffee shop was getting ready to close when we finally realized how late it was. We walked out to the parking lot together, and there was this moment where we just stood there by her car. She looked up at me and said she really enjoyed talking with me, that I was easy to open up to. Then she stepped closer, and before I really knew what was happening, she kissed me. Just a quick kiss, nothing too intense, but it sent electricity through my whole body. I was shocked, but I didn't pull away. When she stepped back, she had this smile on her face and told me she hoped we could do this again soon. Then she got in her car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the parking lot trying to process what just happened. The drive home was torture. I kept replaying the kiss in my head, feeling guilty but also excited. I told myself it was just a moment of weakness, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down I knew I was already hooked. The following week was weird as hell. I kept thinking about Jessica and that kiss, but I was also trying to act normal around Sarah and the kids. I found myself staying late at the office more often, not because I had extra work, but because I was hoping to run into Jessica at the gym again. Sarah started noticing I was coming home later than usual. One evening I walked in around 9:30, and she was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner. She asked where I'd been, and I told her I had to finish up some reports. She gave me this look like she didn't quite buy it, but she didn't push it. The kids were already in their rooms doing homework, so the house felt pretty quiet. Sarah and I sat down to watch TV, but I was distracted, checking my phone more than usual. I'd given Jessica my number that night at the coffee shop, and I kept hoping she'd text me. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jessica, just saying she had a good time talking the other night and asking if I wanted to grab coffee again soon. My heart started racing as I typed back that I'd like that. Sarah was sitting right next to me on the couch, but I angled the phone away from her. She asked who was texting me so late, and I said it was just a work thing. She looked at me funny and pointed out that it was pretty late for work stuff. I just shrugged and said, you know how clients can be, always wanting updates at weird hours. We went to bed around 11, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jessica's text and when I could see her again. Sarah fell asleep pretty quickly, but I lay there staring at the ceiling for hours. The next few days followed the same pattern. I'd stay late at work, hit the gym, and hope to run into Jessica. We texted back and forth throughout the day, nothing too inappropriate, but definitely flirty. She'd send me photos of houses she was showing, and I'd respond with updates about my marketing campaigns. Sarah definitely noticed something was off. She asked me a couple more times why I was working so late, and I kept giving her vague answers about big projects and demanding clients. She seemed suspicious, but didn't really press the issue. One night she was doing laundry and asked me to empty my pockets before she threw my work pants in the wash. I handed her my wallet and keys, but I kept my phone with me. She noticed and asked why I was being so protective of my phone lately. I told her I wasn't being protective, just had some work emails I needed to respond to. But the truth was I had been texting with Jessica throughout the day and didn't want Sarah to see any of it. The messages weren't explicitly sexual or anything, but they were definitely more intimate than they should have been. Sarah stood there holding my pants, looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. She asked if everything was okay between us, if there was something I wanted to talk about. For a second I almost came clean, almost told her about Jessica and the kiss and how confused I was feeling. But instead I just said everything was fine, I was just stressed about work. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She threw my pants in the washing machine and went upstairs without saying anything else. A few days later, things came to a head in the kitchen. It was a Saturday morning, and I was making coffee while Sarah was getting breakfast ready for the kids. My phone was sitting on the counter when it buzzed with a text message. Sarah was closer to the phone than I was, and she glanced at the screen. I saw her expression change immediately. She picked up the phone and looked at the message more closely. I rushed over and tried to take the phone from her, but she held it away from me. She asked who Jessica was and why she was texting me good morning with a heart emoji. My stomach dropped because I realized I'd been careless. I told her Jessica was just a friend from the gym, that we sometimes grabbed coffee after workouts. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then asked why a friend from the gym would be sending me heart emojis at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. I tried to play it off, said she was just a friendly person, that the emoji didn't mean anything. But Sarah wasn't buying it. She started scrolling through the message thread, reading our conversations from the past week. I watched her face get more and more upset as she read. There wasn't anything explicitly sexual in the messages, but they were definitely flirtier than they should have been. Lots of compliments, inside jokes, that kind of thing. The kind of text you send when you're interested in someone. Sarah asked me point blank if I was having an affair. I panicked and denied it completely. I told her she was being paranoid, that Jessica was just a friend and she was reading too much into some innocent text messages. She asked why I hadn't mentioned this friend before, why I was being so secretive about my phone lately, why I'd been working late so often. I kept deflecting, saying she was being jealous for no reason. But then she found the message where Jessica had asked if I wanted to meet up for dinner sometime. And my response where I said I'd love to, but we'd have to be careful about where we went. Sarah read that out loud and asked me what I meant by being careful. I tried to explain it away, said I just meant we'd have to find a place that wasn't too crowded since we both had busy schedules. But even as I said it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. The kids came into the kitchen asking about breakfast, so Sarah put the phone down and started getting their cereal ready. But I could see she was shaking, and she wouldn't look at me. She told the kids to eat in the living room so they could watch cartoons. After they left, she turned back to me and said she knew something was going on. that I'd been different lately, distant and secretive. She asked me again if I was cheating on her. I looked her in the eyes and lied. I told her she was imagining things, that I loved her and would never cheat. That Jessica was just a friend, and she was making a big deal out of nothing. Sarah stared at me for what felt like forever. Then she said she wanted to believe me, but something didn't feel right. She asked me to promise her that nothing inappropriate was happening with this Jessica person. I promised, even though we both knew I was lying. She nodded and went back to cleaning up the kitchen, but the tension was thick. I knew I'd bought myself some time, but I also knew she wasn't going to let this go. The weekend was brutal. Sarah barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was just about practical stuff like grocery shopping or the kids' schedules. I could feel her watching me whenever I used my phone, so I started being extra careful about when and where I checked messages. Sunday night we were getting ready for bed, and Sarah was unusually quiet. She was folding laundry on the bed while I brushed my teeth in the bathroom. When I came back into the bedroom, she was holding something in her hand. It was a receipt from Romano's, this Italian place downtown. I'd taken Jessica there for lunch the previous Tuesday, told Sarah I was in back-to-back meetings all afternoon. My heart started pounding because I realized I must have left it in my pants pocket. Sarah asked me when I'd been to Romano's. I tried to think fast, told her I'd grabbed lunch there with a client last week. She asked which client, and I made up some name. Said it was a potential new account. She looked at the receipt more carefully and pointed out that it was for 2 meals and a bottle of wine. She asked what kind of business lunch involved wine in the middle of the day. I said the client was from Italy, and it was part of their culture, that I was just trying to make them comfortable. Sarah sat down on the bed and asked me to stop lying to her. She said the receipt was dated for last Tuesday, the same day I told her I was stuck in meetings until 6. She'd called my office that day around 4, and my assistant said I'd left at noon. I felt trapped. I tried to explain that the meeting ran long and we moved it to the restaurant, that I'd forgotten to update my assistant. But Sarah wasn't having it anymore. She asked me again if I was having an affair. Her voice was shaking, and I could see tears in her eyes. She said she'd been married to me for 15 years, and she knew when I was lying to her. I sat down next to her on the bed and took her hands. I looked her in the eyes and denied everything again. I told her she was being paranoid, that work had been stressful and maybe I'd been distracted, but I wasn't cheating on her. I started gaslighting her, telling her she was imagining things because she was insecure. I said maybe she should talk to someone about her trust issues, that it wasn't healthy to be so suspicious all the time. Sarah pulled her hands away from mine and stared at me. She asked why I was making her feel crazy when she had legitimate reasons to be concerned. The secret of texting, the late nights, the receipt from a restaurant I'd lied about going to. I kept denying everything, telling her she was connecting dots that weren't there. I said I loved her and our family, and I was hurt that she would even think I was capable of cheating. She started crying then, saying she wanted to believe me, but everything felt wrong. She asked me to please just tell her the truth, that we could work through whatever was happening if I was just honest with her. For a moment, I almost broke down and confessed everything. Seeing her cry because of my lies was killing me. But I was in too deep now, and I was terrified of losing everything. So I kept lying. I held her while she cried and told her over and over that nothing was happening, that she was the only woman I wanted. I promised to be more transparent about my schedule, to include her more in my day-to-day activities. She eventually stopped crying and said she hoped I was telling the truth. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't really believe me anymore. The trust was already broken, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. The next week at work was a nightmare. I couldn't concentrate on anything because I kept thinking about the conversation with Sarah and how close I'd come to getting caught. I knew I should end things with Jessica, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I met up with my buddy Dave for lunch on Wednesday. We'd been friends since college, and he was one of the few people I felt like I could talk to about personal stuff. I didn't plan to tell him about Jessica, but I was feeling so guilty and confused that it just came spilling out. Dave listened to the whole story without saying much. When I finished, he just stared at me for a minute. Then he asked me what the hell I was thinking, throwing away my marriage for some woman I barely knew. I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that things with Sarah had been difficult lately, and Jessica made me feel alive again. Dave cut me off and said that was the oldest excuse in the book, that every cheating husband thought he had special circumstances. He reminded me that Sarah was a good woman who'd been nothing but loyal to me for 15 years. He asked me if I really thought Jessica was worth losing my wife, my kids, my house, probably half my income in alimony and child support. I told him I wasn't planning to leave Sarah, that I was just trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Dave laughed bitterly and said I was delusional if I thought I could keep both women happy indefinitely. He asked me what I thought would happen when Sarah found out, because she would find out eventually. He said wives always find out, and the longer I dragged it out, the worse it would be when everything came crashing down. I tried to argue that maybe Sarah would never find out, that I could just be more careful. Dave shook his head and said I was already being sloppy, that Sarah was already suspicious. He predicted that within a month, everything would blow up in my face. He asked me to think about what I really wanted. Did I want to save my marriage, or did I want to keep screwing around with Jessica? Because I couldn't have both, and trying to keep both was going to destroy everything. Dave told me about his cousin who'd had an affair a few years back. The guy lost his wife, his kids, his house, and ended up paying massive alimony payments. The affair partner dumped him as soon as things got messy, and now he was living alone in a studio apartment, seeing his kids every other weekend. He asked me if that's what I wanted for my life. I said of course not, but I felt trapped. I'd already lied so much to Sarah that I didn't know how to come clean without losing everything anyway. Dave said the longer I waited, the worse it would get. He told me I needed to end things with Jessica immediately and figure out how to rebuild trust with Sarah. He said it would be hard work and might not even be possible, but it was my only shot at saving my marriage. I knew he was right, but I couldn't bring myself to commit to ending things with Jessica. The thought of never seeing her again made me feel sick. I was addicted to the excitement and the attention, even though I knew it was destroying my life. Dave could see I wasn't ready to listen to reason. He said he tried to warn me, but ultimately I had to make my own choices. He just hoped I wouldn't regret them for the rest of my life. A few days later, everything fell apart completely. I was in the living room watching TV after dinner when Sarah came in with her laptop. She sat down across from me with this expression I'd never seen before. Calm but determined, like she'd made some kind of decision. She opened the laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a Facebook photo of me and Jessica at Romano's. We were sitting close together, laughing about something, and it was obvious from the body language that we were more than friends. Jessica must have posted it and tagged the restaurant. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the photo, trying to figure out how to explain it away, but there was no denying what it showed. Sarah asked me if I still wanted to claim that Jessica was just a friend from the gym. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Sarah said she'd been doing some digging after our conversation last weekend. She'd looked up Jessica on social media, found her real estate company's website, even driven by her office. She said she'd found 3 more photos of us together on Jessica's Instagram account. One from the coffee shop, one from some restaurant I didn't even remember going to, and one from the park where we'd met up the previous Saturday when I told Sarah I was playing golf. Sarah asked me how long it had been going on. Her voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it worse than if she'd been screaming at me. I could tell she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. I finally found my voice and tried to minimize it. I told her it had only been a few weeks, that it wasn't serious, that I'd been planning to end it. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said the photos were dated going back almost 2 months. She asked me if I'd slept with Jessica. I hesitated too long before answering, and she took that as confirmation. The truth was we'd only kissed a few more times and done some heavy petting, but I could see Sarah wasn't going to believe that now. She asked me how many times I'd lied to her face over the past 2 months. How many times I'd looked her in the eyes and told her nothing was happening when I knew damn well I was cheating on her. I tried to apologize, told her I was sorry and that I'd made a terrible mistake. I said I loved her and wanted to work things out, that I'd do anything to save our marriage. Sarah just stared at me like I was a stranger. She asked me if I thought she was stupid, if I really believed she would just forgive and forget after months of lies and deception. She said she'd trusted me completely for 15 years, and I'd thrown that away for some woman I barely knew. I got down on my knees in front of her chair and begged her to give me another chance. I promised I'd never see Jessica again, that I'd go to counseling, whatever she wanted. I was crying and probably looked pathetic, but I didn't care. Sarah stood up and walked away from me. She said she'd already made an appointment with a divorce lawyer for Monday morning. She'd opened her own bank account and transferred half our savings. She'd even talked to a realtor about putting the house on the market. I couldn't believe how quickly and efficiently she'd moved. While I'd been agonizing over my guilt and trying to figure out what to do, she'd been planning her exit strategy. She said she'd wasted enough years on me and wasn't going to waste any more. She told me I had until the end of the week to find somewhere else to live. She'd already talked to the kids and told them we were getting divorced because Daddy had broken his promises to Mommy. She said they were upset but not surprised because they'd noticed the tension in the house. I begged her to reconsider, to at least try counseling before giving up on our marriage. But Sarah said she was done. She'd given me multiple chances to come clean, and I'd chosen to keep lying. She said she could never trust me again, and a marriage without trust wasn't worth saving. Monday morning came way too fast. I'd barely slept all weekend, and Sarah had been giving me the silent treatment except for logistics about the kids. I took the day off work and met her at the lawyer's office, hoping I could somehow talk her out of going through with the divorce. The lawyer was this sharp-looking woman in her 50s who clearly dealt with cheating husbands all the time. She had zero sympathy for my situation and got straight down to business about asset division and custody arrangements. I tried to interrupt a few times to ask Sarah if we could talk privately, but she just ignored me. The lawyer explained that Sarah wanted primary custody of the kids with supervised visitation for me until we could establish a more permanent arrangement. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Supervised visitation with my own children, like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. I asked what I'd done to deserve that, and the lawyer said emotional trauma to the children through infidelity was grounds for restricted access. Sarah finally looked at me then and said she didn't trust me to be alone with the kids right now. She said I'd proven I was a liar, and she needed time to figure out what kind of father I really was. That cut deeper than anything else she could have said. The lawyer went through the financial stuff next. Sarah wanted the house, which made sense since the kids needed stability. I'd have to pay child support and alimony, which would eat up most of my income. I'd basically be starting over financially at 42 years old. I asked if we could try mediation instead of going straight to divorce court. The lawyer said that was up to Sarah, but she'd already made it clear she wanted to move forward as quickly as possible. Sarah said she saw no point in dragging things out. When it came time to sign the papers, I hesitated. I asked Sarah one more time if she'd reconsider, if we could at least try counseling before making this final. She looked me in the eye and said I'd had 2 months to make better choices, and I'd chosen Jessica every single time. She said she'd begged me to tell her the truth, given me multiple opportunities to come clean, and I'd looked her in the face and lied repeatedly. She said she couldn't spend the rest of her life wondering what else I was lying about. I signed the papers with shaking hands. The lawyer said she'd file them that afternoon, and we could expect the divorce to be final in about 60 days. She handed me a card for a men's counseling group and said I might want to think about why I'd sabotaged my marriage. After we left the lawyer's office, Sarah and I stood on the sidewalk in awkward silence. I tried one more time to apologize, to tell her how sorry I was and how much I regretted everything. She said she was sorry too, sorry she'd wasted 15 years on someone who could lie to her so easily. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing there alone. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day driving around aimlessly, trying to process what had just happened. My marriage was over. I was going to lose my house and barely see my kids, and it was entirely my fault. I thought about calling Jessica to tell her what had happened, but I realized I didn't even want to see her anymore. The excitement and attraction I'd felt was completely gone, replaced by shame and regret. She'd cost me everything, and for what? A few stolen kisses and some flirty text messages? That evening I started looking for apartments online. Sarah had given me until Friday to move out, and I needed to find somewhere cheap since most of my income would be going to support payments. I found a studio apartment across town that I could barely afford and put in an application. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new studio apartment surrounded by boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack. The place was depressing as hell, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom that barely had room to turn around in. But it was all I could afford on what was left of my salary after child support and alimony. I tried to reach out to Jessica a few times after the divorce papers were filed, thinking maybe we could finally be together openly now. But she'd gone completely cold on me. She said she hadn't signed up for all this drama and didn't want to be responsible for breaking up a family. The irony was brutal. I destroyed my marriage for a woman who dumped me the second things got complicated. She'd blocked my number and unfriended me on social media. I was completely alone, having lost both the woman I'd been married to for 15 years and the woman I'd thrown it all away for. Work was a nightmare too. Word had gotten around the office about my divorce, and people were treating me differently. Some were sympathetic, but others clearly saw me as the guy who'd cheated on his wife and lost everything. My focus was shot, and I was barely keeping up with my responsibilities. The worst part was only seeing my kids every other weekend. Emma and Jake were confused and hurt, asking me why I couldn't live at home anymore and when I was coming back. I tried to explain that sometimes adults make mistakes that can't be fixed, but how do you tell your children that daddy destroyed the family because he wanted to kiss another woman? Sarah was civil but cold during the custody exchanges. She'd lost weight and looked tired all the time. I could see the stress of being a single parent was wearing on her, but she never complained or asked for help. She was handling everything with a dignity I definitely didn't deserve. I'd started seeing a therapist like the lawyer had suggested, trying to figure out why I'd made such destructive choices. The therapist asked a lot of questions about my marriage, my childhood, my self-esteem. But honestly, I didn't think there was some deep psychological reason for what I'd done. I think I just got bored and selfish and stupid. I wanted the excitement of something new without giving up the security of what I had. I thought I could have both, and I was too arrogant to listen when people tried to warn me otherwise. The therapist said I was dealing with consequences that would last the rest of my life. My relationship with my children would never be the same. Sarah would never trust me again, even if we somehow ended up being friends years down the road. And I'd have to live with knowing that I'd hurt the people I loved most for absolutely nothing. Some nights I'd lie awake in that tiny apartment thinking about what my life used to be like. Coming home to a warm house with my family, helping the kids with homework, watching TV with Sarah on the couch. Simple stuff that I'd taken for granted and would never have again. I'd thrown away 15 years of marriage, a relationship with a woman who'd loved me unconditionally, and a stable home for my children. And for what? A few months of flirtation with someone who didn't even care enough to stick around when things got tough. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting on a bench in the park near my old house. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I could see families playing with their kids, couples walking their dogs, all the normal weekend activities I used to be part of. I'd just dropped Emma and Jake back at Sarah's house after my weekend with them. They were getting used to the new routine, but I could tell they still didn't understand why things had to be this way. Emma had asked me again when I was coming home, and I had to explain again that this was home now. Sarah had started dating someone new, a guy named Tom who worked at the hospital with her. The kids mentioned him sometimes during our visits, said he was nice and helped Mom with stuff around the house. I should have been happy that she was moving on, but it felt like another knife in my gut. I thought about Jessica sometimes, wondered if she ever felt guilty about her role in destroying my family. Probably not. She'd moved on with her life like nothing had happened, while I was still dealing with the consequences of our affair every single day. The financial strain was constant. Between child support, alimony, and my own living expenses, I was barely scraping by. I'd had to sell my car and buy something cheaper, cancel my gym membership, stop eating out. Every dollar was accounted for, and there was never anything left over. My relationship with my kids was slowly improving, but it would never be the same as when we all lived together. I was missing so much of their daily lives, homework struggles, friend drama, bedtime stories. I was becoming a weekend dad, someone who took them to movies and restaurants, but wasn't there for the real parenting. The loneliness was the worst part. I'd go days without having a real conversation with another adult. My friends had mostly sided with Sarah in the divorce, which I understood, but still hurt. I was the guy who'd cheated on his wife, and nobody wanted to be associated with that. I joined a support group for divorced men, but listening to other guys' stories just made me feel worse about my own choices. Some of them had legitimate reasons for their marriages ending: abuse, addiction, irreconcilable differences. I was just the idiot who'd thrown everything away for a meaningless fling. The therapist said I needed to forgive myself eventually, that carrying all this guilt wasn't healthy. But I didn't want to forgive myself. I wanted to remember how much pain I'd caused, so I'd never be tempted to make such selfish choices again. I thought about the man I used to be before I met Jessica. I wasn't perfect, but I was a decent husband and father. I provided for my family, showed up for school events, helped with housework. I was someone my wife could count on and my kids could look up to. Now I was just a cautionary tale, the guy who had everything and threw it away for nothing. I'd become the kind of man I used to judge, the kind of father I never wanted to be. Epilogue. It's been 2 years now since everything fell apart. I'm still in the same studio apartment, still paying most of my income and support payments, still seeing my kids every other weekend. Sarah married Tom last month, and the kids seem happy with their new stepdad. I've accepted that this is my life now. The consequences of my choices aren't going away, and I have to live with them every day. Some nights are harder than others, but I've stopped hoping things will go back to the way they were. I think about that first kiss with Jessica sometimes, how excited and alive it made me feel. It cost me everything I actually cared about, but for a few seconds it felt worth it. That's the part that scares me the most, that I was so easily willing to risk everything for such a small thrill. The kids are doing okay, which is what matters most. They've adjusted to the divorce better than I expected, probably because Sarah has been amazing about keeping things stable for them. I'm grateful she's a better person than I am, that she's putting their needs first even when it would be easier to be bitter. I still go to therapy sometimes, though not as regularly as I should. The therapist says I've made progress in understanding why I made such destructive choices. But understanding doesn't undo the damage, and it doesn't bring back what I lost. If I could go back and change things, I'd delete Jessica's number the first time she texted me. I'd focus on fixing whatever was wrong in my marriage instead of looking for excitement somewhere else. I'd remember that the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's just different grass, and it's not worth destroying your whole life to find out what it feels like.